been a lot of conversations about every aspect of my former co-host, my friend Pete Hegseth, his personal life, his professional life, and his qualifications to be the Secretary of Defense. Well, we have the opportunity today to speak to two men that know him very well. And they know him in a different way that I would ever have the honor of getting to know him. That is, they fought with him in war. So joining us now is First Sergeant Eric Geressy and Staff Sergeant Cliff Meros. Both fought with Pete, served with Pete, side by side with Pete, and I appreciate both of their service and both of them being with us today here on the Will Cain Show. Good afternoon. I guess it's good afternoon. What's up, fellas?
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. First Sergeant, I think I'll start with you, First Sergeant Geressy. You were with Pete in Iraq. I think I have that correct. And I believe that you and I have talked before, and we've talked about here comes this guy from Princeton, here comes this guy from Harvard, and he steps in here. And it would be an understatement to say he's got to earn the respect of the men on the ground. Did that happen? How did that happen?
Yes, sir. So I was serving with the 101st Airborne Division at the time. We were the Rakasans, the 3rd Brigade. A lot of people know who that unit is. A lot of people don't like it, but it's one of the most storied units in the U.S. Army. We were short officers, and Pete volunteered to, which I never heard of anybody else doing, volunteered to deploy as a rifle platoon leader in an infantry company with the 101st Airborne in 2005 to Iraq, which was probably one of the most dangerous times in Iraq during the duration of the entire war. He was one of these guys that, he had a great education, great background. He didn't have to be there with us, had a good job, but he's a patriot through and through. He could have sat home and didn't put himself in harm's way, but he chose not to. He chose to come there and lead this young soldiers, this rifle platoon, into combat. The unit was on its 3rd combat deployment at that time. So him coming in, being from a National Guard unit, no combat experience, not everybody could do that. That's a very difficult thing to come in and earn those soldiers' respect. He did that by always placing the men first, leading from the front at all times. His dedication to these soldiers, he went above and beyond numerous times that I've seen firsthand, putting himself in harm's way to make sure he didn't get any of these guys hurt or worse, killed. Because for the combat leaders, that's the worst thing. They're not worried about themselves getting hurt. They're worried about losing their fellow troops, especially those that they're responsible for. He did this flawlessly,
right.
And that's how we earn their respect.
And then, Staff Sergeant, I know that's the same thing for you, Cliff Meros. I mean, can we step back? It's like I can only presume, and I would never. I probably shouldn't presume because I can't put myself in the situation of you men, or for that matter, Pete. But it's not just that he came in the First Sergeant situation. Not just he came in with no combat experience, but that, like Princeton and Harvard, that's not exactly pluses in the virtue column once you arrive, I imagine, in a theater of war. So it's not even that he's starting from sort of a place of no credit. He's starting from a place, I would assume, of a little bit of a lack of credit. Here comes Ivy League, and he's got to figure out a way to lead, to work with NCOs.
Well, when he came to us, we were getting ready to go to Cuba. He walked into a unit. I think the National Guard has a reputation of being, the B team or not a lot of experience, but there's an ebb and flow to the National Guard. You get a bunch of guys that just came off active duty, they go over to the National Guard, or you get guys that just join directly, go right into the National Guard, and they don't have experience. He came in at a time when there was a lot of guys that have been there. We had, I had been to Bosnia. We had guys that were in the first Gulf War, prior Marines, Army infantry. We were a lot of salty guys, and to have this guy from Princeton walk in and be your lieutenant, it's not like he was immediately welcomed. but that didn't stop him, and that didn't change anything. That his respect was earned pretty quickly. He knew what he was walking into. He knew he could tell that we weren't going to take his crap, I think, and he didn't have any problem, jumping right in and knowing how to deal with us, and that's respected off the bat. I don't know if you have experience in an infantry unit, but you don't just walk in and get respect. You have to earn it. And a lot of my guys weren't going to take it, and right away he figured it out. He knew how to be the situational leader, which is something a lot of guys can't do. A lot of guys, they have their path and that's how they do it. I'm this kind of leader, and you're gonna no. He knew to take some of what we had to give him just as much as he was giving it to us, and we all were able to immediately click and get a mission done. We might not have been the most glorious mission. There's a lot of stuff we still can't talk about in Cuba, but it was a necessary mission, and it took us doing a lot of long hours and a lot of hard work to get there.
Can I ask you how? Like you talk about, he did it. And I mean, I don't know if you can do it by serving me an example of either, a technique of leadership or a style or even a moment, but like how? And I'm going to tell you why I'm so curious about that how in just a moment. But you say to me, Staff Sergeant, that he did step into that difficult situation. It didn't take long, but how did he do that?
Well, so like one example would be, leave it to me to figure this out. I go to the tropics and I have this horrible cold as soon as I get there, and I'm miserable, and he could tell I was, and I refuse to stop doing my job. But he looks at me, he knows where I'm at, and he's like, look, why don't you go back, and I'll take your spot for the day. And I wasn't going to have any of them, but I never heard a lieutenant talk like that before, who, it's usually like, whatever, it's their mission. They're going to, shine, and you're just going to be, a puppet. No, he was all about understanding what his guys were going through, seeing what the best piece for the mission. Maybe I should have stepped out. Maybe I wasn't in the best condition at that time, but he sat with me. He's like, look, if you really want to walk away from this, go ahead. I'll take over your spot. I mean, who does that? Not a lot of people do that. That's true leadership, understanding what your guys are going through, understanding what the changes are going to be, and then trying to beat everybody else to it.
Right. And Eric, would you give me an example? I know, like you said, I think the unit you guys were with, you'd had 3 tours, you told me, I believe, and then here comes Pete. Was there a moment where you're like, oh, okay, is there a specific moment? Is there one memory? Is there one mission where you're like, okay, this guy's he's gonna be good. He's one of us.
Absolutely. And I'd like to just caveat, these guys, serve as an infantry platoon leader. They're the guy in charge of that platoon. Pete always took the input of all the NCOs, critical thinker, and then, follow up with a good decision. How these guys earn that respect is by sharing those hardships, being down on the line, being down there at the most dangerous part of the operation. Setting that example under fire. One example, we did a nighttime air assault raid in Baghdad. This was our tour of duty. We were in Baghdad for half of it, and then we were in Samarra for the other half. One of the times was one of his first missions, because I was very hard. I took, noteworthy of his Princeton background and where he was coming from, and I'm glad his previous unit, you guys did a good job teaching him how NCOs lead. Because when we got him, he was ready for us. But our first mission was this nighttime air assault raid, and I went on all the first missions with all the platoons, not to be a take over or anything like that, but just to be an extra guy to help out, especially because all our officers, that was their first combat deployment at the platoon level. So I went on each one of these operations with them, at least the first dozen or so. We were doing a raid on a target, multiple buildings, and it was with a unit called the Wolf Brigade. They were part of the Iraqi Ministry of Interior. They were primarily a Shia unit, and we had never. I look back on some of the things that we did then, from what I know now, and I'm surprised any of us made it back home. looking back on some of the ways we were operating, but we had never done any kind of planning. We didn't know these guys. We had no relationship with them. Now here we are going full throttle, nighttime, air assault raid, going after a high value target in Baghdad, 02, 03 in the morning. His platoon and plus about 30 of this Wolf Brigade, who we'd never worked with, never been on a helicopter with, none of this stuff. So we get on the aircraft. We meet them at the aircraft. We didn't even do any kind of really rehearsals or mission planning with them like we would normally do. Pete and his NCOs, the way we set up on the aircraft, they were on the tail end of the ramp, so they could be the first ones leading the assault off the aircraft onto the target, because we were landing what they call land right on the X, right outside the objective. I was further away front, just so I could make sure everybody got off the aircraft. They didn't have any gear or weapons or anything. Like I said, the first time we worked with these guys. As they loaded off, immediately started hearing a bunch of gunfire, and I couldn't tell what was happening on the aircraft. Pilots started lifting off while I was still on the bird, so I kind of got I'm already clumsy as it is, so I got a good, couple of feet drop off the aircraft nighttime. We're in full kit, we're under goggles, everything. And what had happened was the Iraqi soldiers had immediately started opening fire on the target buildings out of nowhere. When I got on the ground, Pete was already up front trying to get the Iraqis to stop shooting. I came running up. We got them to stop firing. Then we couldn't get them to move onto the buildings. So, we start, firing them up, and Pete gets out up front and leads these guys to the building, number one man through the door, which is exactly where the platoon leader is not supposed to be, leading the assault force. But he's doing that for two things. One, that's the most dangerous part. He's getting these Iraqis to move, and he's the one taking the most dangerous part of this. So his soldiers aren't the ones in the middle of this. Now, should he have been in that spot?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. But he was leading by example. And you asked him about how do you gain that respect? That's how, by doing things like that.
Right.
So, but after that mission,
I want to ask you both this.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I want to hear that. After that mission, what?
So after that, I was like, this guy, I was very hard on him. And I don't think, so a lot of times you're training your soldiers, there's not many things you control in combat. You control three things: your training, your equipment, and your leadership. After that, you're on your own, and the enemy gets a vote. This guy providing that leadership, providing the training he did with the platoon, they don't understand why you're doing some of the things you're doing till you're in those situations. But this is a guy, like, when you're looking, what are these qualifications for SecDef? This is a guy who's been at the lowest level in combat leading soldiers. If that doesn't qualify him to understand the hardships and the challenges of what these guys need and ladies that are putting themselves in harm's way, then I don't know who does. There's no better, there's no school, there's no training that we do that could prepare leaders like this. Leading a platoon, an infantry platoon in combat, and he'll take those lessons with him to that top spot on the Pentagon. And when these troops are called back into harm's way, without a doubt, they'll be trained, they'll be ready, they'll be well led. So, sorry for dragging on.
I appreciate that very much.
I wanted to get that in there.
And Cliff, I was going to ask you the question. I was going to ask both of you, and Eric just did answer it. But what about your experience with him in your mind? You can share with us, Cliff, qualifies him for a new position, that of Secretary of Defense. It's interesting to hear you guys' story, and of course, you guys know who I am, and I've been honest with my audience about my own personal bias. But I do think it's a fair question when people say, just because you're a great soldier, you're a great leader of men at the ground level, to ask the question, how does that qualify you to lead the entire thing, the Pentagon? And I would love to hear from you, Cliff, just like what Eric just told us, is like, what is it about your experience with him qualifies him for Secretary of Defense?
I mean, to leap off where the first sergeant was talking, it's like he said, the groundwork has been done, the foundation has been put in place by him cutting his teeth at the bottom level. I mean, and maybe that's an easy answer to just skate on, but that's like the most important. Most people get put into these positions. Most of these people, even generals, are just plopped and put where they want to be put so they could make the next rank. He wasn't that person. He earned everything he got. I've been around a lot of leadership, state level in the military. I recognize when somebody's doing something because they know it's the right thing, and I know when a guy is preaching to me to be the good neighbor, or the guy is preaching to me, don't be hard on your guys, or understand them. He gets it, and that's probably the most important thing to understand when you take it to the top. Yeah, there are going to be some challenges at the top, I'm sure, but your groundwork is what's most important. There's plenty of leaders in this country who get installed and they really are not doing that work. They're having their advisors do it, but I don't see that with Pete. I know Pete is going to have his thumb on the pulse, and he's going to be making sure it's done right.
Right.
It's just like I said, his leadership. He understands being a leader. He understands when to be a servant leader and when to be an authoritarian. He understands to take the intel that's coming from his, at that time sergeants, but his subordinates, take the intel and actually formulate a plan, not go to what the last guy did or figure out what the record book says. Let's figure out how to actually make a change and make it work. And it's easy to say what my experience was. I've known him for years after. We still talk often. And all he ever does is represent being the better person, finding the answer and doing the right thing. I don't see how that isn't what's qualifying him for that role.
With the words that you two have used, if I just put them together, I mean, you've said critical thinker, you've said ground level, knowing when to be a servant leader and when to be an authoritarian leader, in your finger on the pulse of the men. And then maybe what I can add to my experience on top of y'all's is I've actually spent a lot of time with the thinker who steps back from that and can critically analyze the broader picture and approach this with an overarching wisdom. And I would offer you that between all of this, you come up with a pretty unique profile of leadership that hasn't been in pursuit of careerism. To your point of how much of the military is filled with careerism, it's a pretty unique portrait of leadership. And then last thing to both of you guys, and that's reflected, right? Because there's a petition going around of guys like you who have fought with Pete, all signing on to he should be the next Secretary of Defense. Cliff, then Eric. Cliff, I don't even know what the numbers are up to, but it's quite a statement to see all the guys that served with Pete saying this.
Well, we keep in touch, a lot of us, especially for some reason. The Cuba group is a group that's really stuck together. We still talk a lot. I still talk to most of the people in the military I've been with, but that group has been really strong. And I haven't heard one person not want to jump on and somehow, how do we get to the senators? How do we get people to understand the importance of this? Like, right. It amazes us what we hear in the news compared to who we know as a person. Like, it just doesn't make sense, the picture they're making. They're talking about his cursing and his drinking. The guy, we used to cringe because he wouldn't curse. He used to drive us nuts. That was our whole goal, is to get him to curse before the end of the deployment. And now they're saying he's like off spouting these words. It doesn't make sense. His drinking. You've never been in an infantry unit, but some guys are making a sport, and he was always talking about doing the right thing, not getting out of control, always putting yourself in check. I mean, all these guys just can't wait to speak on his behalf if they get the chance. They all want to send letters. We're all getting stuff together and trying to send it out to as many people as we can. And, hopefully people are going to see this is the right guy for that spot.
And Eric, I'm sure, I don't know, same with your Rakkasan?
Oh, 100%. And it's not just Rakkasans. I still work quite around a lot of military, and he, rank and file, everybody from the lower enlisted to senior officers, he's got full support. the president-elect, wants the military focused on lethality and warfighting, and Pete's the guy for that, 100%. And he will take care of all the service members and make sure when they're called out for the next time in harm's way that they're ready, completely ready, and they'll be well led. So,
well, there's no more important voices in this entire conversation than the voices of men like both of you, and like it was mentioned, hopefully it will be heard by senators. All right, so Eric Geressy, First Sergeant, Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 187th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne. Staff Sergeant Cliff Meros, Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion, 113th Infantry Brigade. Thank you both so much for spending time with me, talk about our mutual friend, Pete Hegseth. Thanks, fellas.
thank you, sir.
Will.